Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we discuss Liverpool battering Spurs. Does Ange Postecoglou need to rethink his tactics? Then it's over to Southampton, who have a new man in charge. What can they expect from Ivan Juric? And then we take a little round of applause for fixing Arsenal. You're welcome. That's all on today's episode. So we're back for our last episode of 2024. It's good to see you, Ted Knutson. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I feel like, this is a pretty interesting weekend of football. Feels like we're going into the festive season on a high. Usually the season is an absolute slog and the football's terrible. So appreciate what you've had so far.
And plus for us, from our point of view, when we come back, we'll be coming back around the 2nd of January. There'll have been 2 whole rounds of fixtures between now and then. The table could look very different, except for the team on top, I guess. So loads and loads of action and loads of action to round up from the weekend as well. So we might as well start with the biggest game of the weekend, which for once was also the most incident packed. Spurs 3, Liverpool 6. An insane battering by any measure. I mean, the scoreline makes this look less awful for Spurs than it probably should be, because there was some sensational finishing on their side of the ball. But I mean, look, they went into the game with a Spence, Dragusin, Gray, Porro backline. Like it always looked a bit rough. Ted, did you enjoy this game?
I think this game was delightful. I didn't enjoy the fact that I didn't pull the trigger on any of the bets, even though I sort of outlined what was likely to happen in the variance betting stuff this weekend. I was like, this does not look good. And this could have there could be an American football score on the board there, like a baseball game type score. So where do we even start on this? Let's start with the concept that any team having their second or even third choice back line would have to go and then face off against Liverpool. Like that's a pretty tough sell, right? And I'm not a Spurs fan at all. I like Ange Postecoglou in general. Man, the fucking Arsenal fans and the people that do Arsenal content and media, they slag him off all the time. I'm like, why? Why do you have to do that? Like, what's the point, right? Like, enjoy their suffering, but it doesn't mean you need to like be brutal about it. I don't know. It feels like there are other things you could talk about in football other than like constantly slagging off other people's head coaches that are mostly competent at doing a decent job with their squad. Kim, I think, is more of a neutral observer than you and I. In fact, Kim is a big Spurs fan and was one of the people that founded one of the old school Spurs forum / fan communities. And Kim said that, Ange is doing like the best that he can. Obviously, the summer wasn't that bad for them. And I think that a lot of their signings actually look pretty good when they're healthy. The kids that they signed look like they're going to be quite competent, even as relative kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't expect anything when you're put in front of the thresher of the Liverpool front line that is possibly the best in the world, if maybe the best top 3 anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this game and you think, Liverpool attempted 16 crosses in this game and completed 10 of them.
That's a lot of cross completion. Cross completion is usually more like 20%.
Yeah, so I looked at that and I was like,
is really, yeah.
What would explain this? Playing an 18-year-old centre-back, maybe? Like playing a right wing-back as a conventional left-back? Like there are lots of factors that might go into this. And I mean, when you look at the goals as well, like the first goal, it's an incredible ball, but when the cross comes in, it's 3-on-3 in the box. And then the second one, it's
really 3-on-1 because
the
guys in the front don't realize that like it's there, and you got 2 midfielders that are sitting. I had to actually put the image in the newsletter today, which we don't usually do because I'm not like hyper tactics blog nerd. We don't put 6,000 word newsletters out like the tactics nerds do. But like there's just this moment where like Trent has no pressure. Son realizes that he starts to move, and then suddenly like Liverpool have created a 3v1 like dead center, and obviously the cross is perfect, it kind of has to be, but Trent's capable of doing that at any point. And so it was just this moment where they're capitalizing on a complete lack of awareness from players that are deeply out of position, and that opens the scoring. And then the scoring stayed open the entire time
forever. Yeah, but pretty much the same thing happened with the next one. Then the next one was like
Other
4-on-4
side.
pretty much, like with a couple of midfielders there doing nothing. The third goal is kind of a 4-on-3 because they've got a man on each Spurs man, and Cody Gakpo is completely free on the left wing. So just every time I was just like, guys, what are we doing here? And I mean, okay, so I do think the Ange thing is worth talking about because, like, look, I kind of agree. I get very annoyed, especially with Arsenal fans, like whining about it. I think Spurs play really fun attacking football. They clearly need at least one key part in the deep midfield and a lot of health through the rest of the squad. But there is a Wengerian, obstinacy to Ange, I would say. Like I remember when you remember, like once a year, Arsene would go and do an interview with like a French newspaper, and his interviews with like UK newspapers were just like, "Yeah, we're really focused on the next game, and it's a very tough game when you play Man United." And his French interviews, he'd say like, "I'm a facilitator of what is beautiful in man,"
Yeah.
and and he said that, and I was like, I kind of think that's what Ange does.
And so here's the thing, like you could have ridiculously terrible football like they've had under previous managers at different points. Do you remember the Jose era? Like, was there any joy in the Jose era whatsoever? Like,
When he got fired, I liked that bit.
Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. If you're an Arsenal fan, like keep him. That's fine. You guys can be miserable, not have fun football, and not be successful. So there's a bunch of things going on here under the surface, right? So their stats, like their expected goals numbers, are pretty good. They've also been beating up some really good teams at different points. Like let's just be honest there. They are playing a bit higher variance football. That's okay. Like they're blooding kids. Right? The kids are getting real playing time. Some of the head coaches in the league like don't do that. In fact, Arsenal's head coach isn't playing the winger that the wide forward that they loaned from Chelsea for a big discount for nobody knows. and now they seem to be picking up more injuries, etc. So there is this element where Ange is sort of outwardly combative, and the reasons for that are that's a little bit of his personality, although usually he's pretty pleasant for the most part. Like, but if people keep asking the same questions over and over again, like he'll push back on that. I think the elements that you see where he's obstinate, he hasn't entirely been that way. Like, look at their set pieces this year versus last year. They are night and day different. They brought in outside help, whether that was like obviously named outside help or otherwise. So, like, clearly they realized that this was a shortfall they needed to pay attention to. Somebody had a good conversation with him. And whether he's going to swallow that medicine publicly or not, like, the behavior is very different. And I don't think that he wants to change his philosophy because you can see the parts of it working, right? And much like the greatest league coach of all time, who also has a very clear philosophy that has been unbelievably successful for his entire career up until now.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I don't actually need to change as long as I get the parts. That's not necessarily a wrong way to be, right? Like, I think that if you had to have two different ways to look at the world, and you know that this one has been and can be successful if you get the right parts, like keep teaching them the right way to play football and then wait for the parts to come in, and then everything should click really quickly, as opposed to like other places where like you're even trying to figure out like which of the Man United players are good, how do we teach them to stop leaking goals constantly, and then eventually how do I teach them to have a good base to attack from and then move forward. Like, there are a lot of complex elements in football. Everybody's angry about everything all the time. Same way in the fucking world. But at least you're getting to enjoy elements of this Spurs team that do have success about them. Lots of other teams have had their teeth kicked in by Liverpool. He could have deep blocked this and had the exact same score, like minus the Spurs goals. Like it could have been 4-5-6 with this personnel grouping and against Liverpool and been nil. Instead, it was 3-6. And there were some nice elements of it. And yeah, they lost. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, Liverpool played against them as well as I've seen Liverpool play this year, as well as I've seen anyone play against Spurs this year. Sometimes that is going to happen. And, I kind of feel the same thing. Like, there's a question, I guess, about the wisdom of hiring a guy who plays this way when you don't quite have the parts to play this way yet. Like, if he's going to see, like, there's a question about that, I guess. But to me, it seems insane that you would look at this team and not think, okay, well, if they're all fit And if you had a midfielder in there, okay, a midfielder like Rice or Rodri is very expensive, very hard to come by. But if you had a really outstanding number 6 in there, how good would this team look? I think the answer is probably pretty incredible. Look at Arsenal this weekend, who we'll come on to later. You know, playing without Rice at the base of midfield, and Saliba had a really bad day, and Crystal Palace were cutting through them. So when you're playing with your second, third string backline against Liverpool and you don't have that presence at defensive midfield, it's not that surprising that they put up 4.5 XG on you, something like that.
I think that the Premier League has so many good attackers in it now that you're going to see almost every single team have bad days on a regular basis, because like you have to play perfect in order to shut most of these teams down. And the breadth of talent, not the depth, but the breadth of talent across the whole league means that you get more variation. And that's what makes it fun, right? We want to see underdog teams have good days against the big teams sometimes, especially if it's not our team. And what we're seeing around the league is that's happening every single week against every other team. Liverpool's the only ones that don't seem to have that many bad days right now. And that's great for them. And that's why they're at the top of the table. Everybody else, like, just flip a fucking coin. And if 3 of your players are having a bad day, which is like what, 12.5%, like three of your players in the back line are having a bad day, like, just, you're not going to win that day, and you might lose outright in a really weird, unfortunate fashion, but that's the way of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, this game, shit happens. You're going to get battered at some stage of the season when you play this way. Like, they take their medicine. Hopefully they get some fitness back over Christmas. Mo Salah is now at 26 goal involvements in 16 league games. He leads the league in goals. He leads the league in assists. He's, what, 33? Is he 32, 33? He's old.
Ageless.
I don't know what to do about this guy. Like, I just can't wait for him to leave.
I think the thing that surprised me is just how fast he is, though.
I know, man.
Like, aren't you supposed to slow down at some point? Like, shouldn't you? I mean, even Son has like his slow moments. He no longer really has the wheels that he used to. But Salah, like, every single time you see him emotional, you're like, wow, that dude's just cooking people. Like, how do you go that fast? And their whole team benefits from it because he takes so much gravity. And the other thing is, like, when everybody else suddenly has gravity because they're open, then he's able to just motor into place. Yeah, Liverpool fans should really be enjoying this season. I'm not sure that they're capable of it sometimes. I feel like Liverpool fans are often just like on the cusp of outrage and trying to find reasons to be outraged, even when the world is really successful for them. And I like Liverpool fans. Like, we have people like the Anfield Rap who I love, and I love listening to them talk. Like, just talk about it. It's fine as long as you're not pissed off all the time. It works for me.
Okay, well, let's leave Liverpool where they are then before we do inadvertently annoy them. I mean, look, some of the expected points measures and all that kind of stuff that flies around, like, it kind of has the difference between Arsenal in second and Liverpool in first at more kind of like 2 points. But at this stage, I just find it hard to see Liverpool getting caught. They're playing so well. They're playing as well as anybody in the league, but probably better. And they've got an enormous points advantage. This just feels like it.
And they're the only team in the league that can tighten the screws down and feel like they can keep games sane. Nobody else feels like, even Chelsea against any decent team, like, feels like they can unravel at any point. Caicedo's been out of this world, though. Like, some of the stuff, I mean, obviously they had a 0-0 this weekend against Sean Dyche. I didn't see a lot of outrage from Chelsea fans, but maybe that was because I wasn't online so much this weekend. But like, Caicedo has been doing things that keep them stuck together. And it feels like any other midfield that would be in this league right now does not have him and can't keep things stuck together, and it would all just unravel. So an injury to him, Enzo's good, but Enzo's thriving in a slightly different role. It'd be curious to see, if people can maintain their health, if Liverpool can maintain their health, like, they should run away with it. If something happened, maybe they come back to the pack. But as I said, they're the only ones that seem to have real control over matches this year, which has made it fun to watch for everybody else, but pretty miserable at the same time.
Yeah, the fact they didn't get sucked into an up-down contest with Spurs was honestly one of the most impressive things about this game. They just looked completely unpanicked. But shall we move on to a new managerial appointment? Because Southampton sacked Russell Martin, long past due. They've brought in Ivan Juric, who most recently was coaching Roma. This is not a manager I know that much about. Though he's Croatian, he spent his entire managerial career in Italy, where he also played. Ted, what do you think that we should expect from Juric at Southampton?
So I got in touch with one of my Italian football contacts because I knew that they would have a much better take than I do. I'm not an Italian football hipster, as we found out earlier this year when I got the wrong manager of of Lazio when we were doing a roundup. So the word that I got effectively was, and people should get a little bit excited by this because they always get excited by hipster elements that are associated with Gasparini. So Juric is a Gasparini disciple, early Gasparini, effectively, has some of those funky elements about it, but more of a pressing oriented type system, often usually based off of back three. And the thing that I think is most impressive is he's done a really good job with some truly putrid groups of players. Like some of the transfers that we saw come through in his Torino period in particular, like they're just dudes. Like they're just like names on a sheet. Yeah, and he's sort of pulling off like consistent mid-table, which might be a thing you could do in Italy. I think, weirdly enough, maybe not quite the Roma. Like Roma had just the wrong constitution of squad to allow him to be successful, and obviously that place is like hyper dysfunctional and has been for a long time. But his work at was it Verona and then at Torino seems to be good systemic. He's also allegedly one of the most laid back Slavs that you'll ever meet. I'm not sure if that's like the Italian lifestyle that's crept into him over the years or not, but it sounds like a good personality to kind of be around a place that has a good core of players, many of whom are somewhat young, like they're moldable, and they will have a huge talent in the championship if he doesn't manage a miracle save here. So I think that overall, I'm relatively positive on this signing. I kind of was before as well. And really, the first thing you have to do is just make their play out from the back not insane. Now, the difference between he and Russell Martin is massive. Like he's not possession oriented. He's more press oriented. He's like Italian press, which is to varying degrees interesting and can be successful as long as you don't exhaust the players all the time. And I think that, we might see some adjustments that say that he might go Italian middle block, which we've seen a lot of success in the Portuguese version of that. Fulham this year, but particularly at Nottingham Forest, you see a lot of that style, and it's a good style to play in the current Premier League. So yeah, just shoring things up is the first step, much like at Manchester United, who are not that far from them in the table, and then figuring out like how do we create good systems and good patterns of play to then be able to score goals as well.
Yeah, and there are lots of interesting young players for him to work with there, and I don't really know how much of this is a factor, but my feeling is that Serie A is one of the most stylistically diverse leagues at the moment. Besides the Premier League, it's got to be up there as one of the ones where you're going to face the best coaches playing the largest kind of range of styles. So it feels like quite a good proving ground in that sense, for somebody to come to the Prem.
And his mentor is possibly the best tactical mind in that league right now.
Yeah. He's kind of coming to define this generation of Italian football, which is always, there's your good rule of thumb for the people who talk about Italian football based on stuff they saw in Italy 20 years ago, and the people who've actually watched Italian football at any point in the last 5 years, where they're like, it's very defensive. It's a very defensive league. It's like, my brother, go and watch an Italian football match. If you watch Bologna Juve, maybe.
I was gonna say, like Juve and Napoli at the moment, like pretty weird and defensive, but the rest of the teams that are fighting for that title are interesting and for the most part pretty good. We'll find out. But Atalanta on a huge run right now and fairly successful in the Champions League as well.
I can't wait. I really want them to win the league. Ivan Juric, just looking at his resume, just looks like a big Shakespeare fan to me. He's managed in Mantua, Verona. Now he's at Southampton. Isn't there a bit of Henry V inside? There's a plot against Henry V that was meant to happen in Southampton. There you go. That's what I think is going on with him. So who knows where.
For those of you who would like to complain that Patrick is too educated in the comments, now's the time. Like just hop on there. Little too diverse here.
It's a complaint that's not made that often. Okay. Shall we go to Arsenal then? Because I think that Mikel Arteta watches the pod, loves it.
We fixed
paid
them.
Subscriber. We fixed them. So they started. Obviously, they went into this Palace game having beaten them probably more comfortably than the scoreline would suggest in midweek. Gabriel Jesus gets a hat trick. Nice work. And actually, because Palace played pretty much a first team there, well, one, it meant that Eze missed the weekend, which is probably good for Arsenal. But it was nice to see a different look attack get minutes against a proper Premier League backline. Then at the weekend, really attacking lineup. It was Urgo, Partey, and Havertz as a midfield three, with Jesus, Saka, and Martinelli in attack. I would say that this was not the most control I've seen Arsenal have in a game. They got outshot over the course of the match, but you can't argue that it didn't work in attack. Like, they did create chances.
Maybe they were Spursing.
Well, arguably they need to do that, right? We were kind of saying last time that they need to that draws are worth nothing to them. They need to play for wins. So why not play for wins? Paco Gemes it, and in this game, Jesus gets another couple of goals, which, after weeks of Arsenal fans saying he's totally finished, it turns out that at 27 years old, he may still have something to offer the game.
I might have said he was washed as well. It might have been.
Come on. See, I always, the thing is with Gabriel Jesus, I always want him not to be, but also he might be playing in a slightly different way. Here, that midfield, I think, is partially also about making sure that when Arsenal are in attack, Jesus is in the box rather than combining outside the box, right?
Yeah, like his role and his abilities versus what Havertz does are significantly different, and he doesn't have the same physical capabilities. Like, you have to be a little more careful about managing his minutes, which I was slightly surprised by, like, tossing him right back in after a midweek. But obviously, if you're just having buckets of success against the team, maybe you should. So when we described it last week, it was basically that, Arsenal had only given up like 2 shots against multiple opponents back to back that they kind of outmatched. And the point that we made was that the dial was too conservative at that point. Like, maybe you could give up 4 shots or 5 shots and still be able to sort of push guys forward and get them to score some actual goals, because goals is what gets you 3 points. In this one, there were dudes around the box all the time. And it felt like there were 6 guys forward on a regular basis, which is very unusual for Arsenal, but left them in spots where anytime there was a rebound or a deflection, there was a player to pick it up. And then that immediately went in the goal. And I think the first 2 of those was Jesus. And then after that, you just saw players in and around the box be able to put it away. It's funny, like, Arsenal got used to Havertz being the 9 for quite a while, and all of his hard work and all the things that he does, even if he's not always scoring. And then this year they've had difficulty scoring, and now they've got him as sort of an aggressive 8, effectively, is how I would put it. When he was growing up as a kid, he was the best 10 in the young youth ranks of the Bundesliga, and he started playing for Leverkusen, I think, at age 17. And he's, like, still very tall and physically capable. So, he knows how to play that. He knows how to play tons of different positions. This is the first time that we've seen Arsenal sort of score, 8 goals over the course of the 2 games, and against the same opponent. Now, I'm sure that they hated how little control they had. And in fact, like, you could almost imagine that, Bizarro Arteta on the Bizarro mirror was scratching his face like Pep did, every time that Crystal Palace had, like, a fleet-footed attack against it. But the scoreboard says that across these 2 games, they did really well. And in the future, is there a way that they can find that balance between the 2? That's what every single team in the league seems to be looking for. How do we find the balance to give up, 6 to 8 shots and have 16 of which 5 are really good on the other end? Like, is that possible? Arsenal, when they're healthy, feels like that might be possible. When Rice came in, then suddenly things felt like much better control, which tells you what a big difference a player can make, but also maybe that they made some small adjustments to tighten things up, because the score line was in their favor enough that they felt they could not push the gas so much.
Yeah, Rice and Calafiori came on with kind of a third of the game left, and I think having given up something like 1.5 xG before that, Arsenal gave up 0.1 over the remainder of the game. But I mean, I thought Saliba had a really bad game by his standards. I thought that Mateta was actually fantastic at his ability to receive the ball, facilitate attacks. Saliba also, gets the ball caught under his feet, and it leads to a huge chance for Palace. There's stuff like that, which having a more aggressive attack can bail you out of, right? Like all the shit happens, like, oh God, what are we going to do? Well, if you're playing an intense control style, then you don't have the ability to necessarily to switch gears and score your way out of trouble. If Arsenal can do that, that would be a real boost to their title hopes, or maybe Champions League hopes.
Wow, I was like, that's so optimistic of you. Who are you? Like,
No.
we've body swapped you with somebody else.
There were a couple of questions that I have for you. So one is a couple of teams. I think it was done. Maybe it was done in the Champions League against Arsenal, and then Palace have done it too, where on Arsenal corners they've left three guys up, towards the halfway line, in the hope that they can spring a quick attack. There's some debate in the Arsenal community about how effective this is as a technique to try and limit the number of Arsenal bodies in the box on corners. What do you think of it as the, I don't know, I guess the creator, the perfecter of set pieces, right? Is that not on your CV? That's on your LinkedIn.
You're getting me in so much. Yeah, okay. Ignore Patrick's characterization of this, but yeah, I've had a lot of influence in the set pieces space. So this is something that I talk to coaches about. Why are you laughing at yourself?
Nothing. This is funny.
So this is always like a classic ball check for coaches. Like, do you have models? And my observation here is like when we are defending corners, like I want to leave up at least two guys and often three guys. Like, and I push for that. And the reason why is because it's one of the ways that you get to create transitions. And we want to create as many transitions as possible because that's what leads to unset defenses and the most likely chances of goal of any particular set of attacks. So this is part of like the educational elements that I actually deliver to coaches and coaching staffs and have been doing so since like 2019 when we started the coursework. Coaches very rarely listen to this at first. And I was like, look, you have to do what you're comfortable with, but at some point you also have to admit that like an extra, 1% chance of conceding this goal while creating a 5% chance of you getting a really good transition breakaway is probably a trade-off that you want to do. We had moments at Midtjylland where we would throw everybody forward and we would see what would happen. So we'd get everybody kind of in and around the box, like the 18, and then we just see how they'd respond. And then we knew that we would adjust to be able to go back and defend it. But like, it was something that we were like very curious as to what was going to happen. And teams used to brick it. They used to be so scared. They'd be like, well, get everybody back. There's no way we're going to like allow them to have an extra attacker who's probably completely irrelevant, by the way, against this. So yeah, I think that teams are desperately searching for ways to help crack Arsenal at least a little bit, to make it a little easier against them on corners in particular. Double teaming the center backs at some point has to be like the right answer. And then the question is like, well, how many guys can we double team center backs with, but also leave guys forward in order to create options? And the test in set pieces is, how do we only give them bad options? That's the question. And the more variation you throw at them, at least the more they have to think a little bit about it and how to adjust on the fly, which is hard for footballers. So maybe that's the right way to go about it. I like leaving at least two up, and especially if they got real pace, like Arsenal would be scared of that. So I think that's probably a way to at least make them think and get an extra body out of there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, they seem to be trying to get around this problem by essentially running corner routines from open play now. You saw the first goal in this match has Gabriel playing up front.
I saw that.
An open play. It was interesting because I talked about Billy Carpenter last week, some of his writing on Arsenal, and he said, well, I think that you should do stuff tactically that the other team is scared of you doing. And one of those things could be when you're chucking guys into the box, firstly, chuck more guys into the box, and secondly, chuck Gabriel into the box. And that's exactly what happened, and Arsenal scored from that first opportunity. Now, I wouldn't do that against, Liverpool necessarily, but it was highly effective there.
I love doing weird things on occasion and make them solve the problem on the fly. And I also like what Arsenal used to do way back in the day, which was basically have Alexis Sanchez up top, pressing, running, like creating all sorts of problems for the two center backs for like 65 minutes. And then they have Giroud come on for that last sort of 30
Yeah.
minutes. And teams are just like, I'm so tired. And we have to deal with this giant who has a good first touch. Like, what the hell are we supposed to do now? And yeah, it was, I love that element of being able to do it. But you have to have the squad that's capable of sort of facilitating both styles of that. And with Arsenal, at least right now, they do have the element of creating set piece like scenarios, and they do it from wide free kicks as well. So in this case, it's like, okay, we're going to do one play. And I love the idea of sort of called basketball plays in open play. That's something that I've been talking about literally since 2014, looking at some of the post up play that Aguero used to do, or Negredo back in the Man City days at Pellegrini. I don't think that we see almost any of that. But again, anytime that you have to make a defense deal with a scenario that they haven't prepared for, and they have to do it on the fly, and they have to solve it correctly, like that's a good challenge for them, especially if it doesn't cost you much on the other side. The question is always like, how much does it cost you to throw that center back up, and what are you scared of?
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll see Arsenal do it against some of the weaker opposition. I know they've got Ipswich just after Christmas Day, so I think that'll be a really interesting game to see whether Arteta attempts a different version of this and maybe tries to bring the dial back a little bit more into the middle. Might be hard to tell because Ipswich suck, so it'd be an interesting one.
One of the things that I loved when Ben White was around was like when he would get forward, he would actually sometimes push to be that far post guy against the fullback. And he's big and strong, and he's got a physical mismatch against pretty much every single fullback in the league that's not himself. I love that concept where suddenly, like when you watch Cristiano Ronaldo during his heyday, like the thing that he will do is he will feint towards the center to get the center backs to bite and think that they know where he's at, and then he comes back and he isolates and he pins a fullback, and that's where so much of his headed goals came from, either on the fly or being able to find that physical mismatch. And then he had players around him that were capable of getting that cross to him when he knew that they had the mismatch. He was able to do that. If you can find ways to create those scenarios, then your crossing situation gets to be much more, much better as well. And that's a little bit, I guess, Liverpool created those crossing situations with significant overloads in certain spots. Maybe they have the option too, but they don't really have the height. They don't have that overwhelming physical presence that Arsenal do right now.
Yeah, agreed. One other thing before we move on from this is that Bukayo Saka goes down injured in this game, and Martinelli moves from left over to right, and he ended up with a goal and an assist, playing wide on the right. And in an unrelated thing over the weekend, Tom Warville mentioned on Twitter that he thought fast attacking teams should maybe start uninverting their wingers so they don't have to cut back to get shots away during fast breaks. Do you think that this is a trend that we'll start to see more of? Especially if we're going back towards kind of big centre forwards. You see, everybody seems to want that again. Do you think that we'll maybe see a little bit more of this over the next couple of years?
I think the bigger benefit is that not about shots. It makes it easier for them to be able to do cutbacks to late runners into the box from midfield. And a bunch of goals that we saw this weekend were from those late runners into the box, usually from midfielders. There's an Ola Aina one there. So we're seeing a series of that. I think that there's value in it, but I have questions as to how practical this is. Bigger center forwards like Chris Wood, wanting to be able to latch on that, and people feel like they can get it on his head whenever they want to. That makes sense, but I don't think that there's a ton of center forwards in the league right now that are that style of player. So the question is just like how able the teams are of benefiting from that situation. And I don't know the answer. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have some great leapers that are good in the air as well, and you could do it with smaller players too. But I think that anytime that, like we said, you're creating something that's situationally different for the defense to deal with, like you're possibly getting some benefit from it.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit as well with Sterling, right? Sterling's expected assist numbers on the right versus on the left. His XG was quite stable from side to side, but his expected assist numbers really popped on the right because he was getting those high value cutback chances. So an interesting thing to watch. Where do you want to go now? So we could talk about Brentford, who lost a home game. We could talk about Ruben Amorim, who lost a home game. We could talk about Barcelona, who lost a home game. What would you like to talk about?
So the Barcelona thing, probably, I know this is the wrong pod for that. Usually that's the Wednesday pod where we talk about Spain, but they look like they're in crisis. but the numbers are ridiculous. They're still
Yeah, they're
incredible.
crazy.
And they were so dominant against Atletico. And this isn't the first time that Simeone has done this shit. And honestly, like, so glorious, him like running down
Yeah, it's
the
great.
steps into the into the dressing room, so excited because he knew that they stole it. He knew, like, this is like such a, this is the end of a beautiful heist movie where it's been perfectly plotted. Everything seems like it's going to go wrong, and then suddenly they take their masks off and they're in the parking lot and they're walking the other way from the cops, and nobody knows, right? That's what this game was. And there's this unbelievable photo, I think, that Sidlow retweeted from Reuters, where it's got like Yog Sorloth in the middle of the pitch, like celebrating, and all the Barcelona kids dead, lying down. Like, I cannot believe this has happened. And it's happened to them a few times. Like, they were super dominant. Was it against Leganes and had that loss as well? So they've had a lot of matches where they're putting up sort of 2 to 3 expected goals. Again, not quite getting the finishing that they had early in the year when they were incredibly dominant, and they're in a bad patch. But the process is so good. You can't hate it too much. Obviously, the press is so loud there that, you know, this will be all people talk about for weeks. But if I'm Hansi Flick, I'm like, yeah, we're just going to keep doing this, and eventually we're going to start stepping on necks again, and nobody's going to get up.
Yeah, the numbers are so much better than their rivals. You know, they're now down in third, and the two teams above them, you know, the Madrid teams both have a game in hand as well. Because Barcelona have taken 6 points from 21 available, right?
Yeah.
But and some of those games, they have had some genuinely pretty bad performances in there, right? So like Betis, Celta, and Sociedad, they were the inferior side in all those games, I think.
They're tired and they got a young squad, right? And young squads get more tired, not less. Like, they're facing physical men. La Liga is a tough damn league. So there are reasons for this. Give them a little breather, though, and the style of play, everything is clicking. Like, there's nothing wrong with it other than the results. Now, very few places have the huevos to be able to, to hold on to that and just say, yeah, continue forward. We don't need to change much. But clearly, like, unlike the Arsenal ones where you're like, they're so dominant, but they're not really attacking and getting the upside of it. They're attacking and getting the upside too. They're just not getting the finishes.
Yeah, I mean, in this game, it was what, 3.4 xG to something like 0.7. But they, I think, you know, the press has dropped a little bit, and they've gone from. I was looking at those deep completions data because some of us only have access to pauper data. But you know, they've gone from being kind of second best in the league up there with Sociedad to now they're kind of middle of the pack. So it just feels like the press drops a little bit. You know, pressure on the ball drops a little bit, and maybe your high line is a little bit looser. And they've gone from catching people offside relentlessly and preventing you getting anything away to the winning goal in this game, where Molina breaks the high line and they get the. I mean, it still requires it goes through 2 defenders, and Sorloth has to put a great finish on it. So it's still kind of ridiculous.
Can you remind me? Was the best player in La Liga in this match?
No.
Or was he injured?
Yeah. He's out.
Yeah, you take the
Rafinha
best player.
Did pretty well still.
Yeah, well, I mean, take the best player in any of these teams. Like, take Salah out of Liverpool, and how's that going to look against, you know, one of the best, you know, top 3 teams? They still look pretty awesome. So I don't know. We talk so many times on this podcast about overreactions, and usually we try and stay kind of in the middle on reactions. I overreacted in a way. How excited I was about Barcelona being super dominant early in the year. And then that followed true that they were super dominant. And it was totally unexpected. I think the thing that I expected was that they would fall off, and the stats and the metrics haven't fallen off, just the results. So maybe Robbie will have a different take, but you won't see him until the new year either. So if you're a Kool-Aid, you know, cool it. And everybody else, just enjoy.
Yeah, I think if you want a little treat, a little Christmas treat, try and find some extended highlights of this game and just watch Pedri in them.
Oh,
Pedri completed, he had like 4 dribbles completed. Every pass he played seemed to cut like 4 Atleti players out of the game. He passed into penalty area constantly. He picked up loose balls constantly. He had loads of chances created. He scored. He's just absolutely unbelievable. And in this team, he's like a veteran relative to the rest of the lineup.
If you wanted to
Staggering.
donate your Christmas wishes, like it's to the health of Pedri and Lamine Yamal. That is it. Like those are the only places for the good of football. Unless you're a Madrid fan, like just keep those kids healthy for the rest of their careers, so that the rest of us can enjoy this new wave.
Okay. Well, I think we're approaching the end. Anyone you want to hit before we get out of here, Ted?
I think we do have to say a note about the other side of Manchester. So not the blue side, but the red side. The blue side, just hold on until the transfer window comes and hope that it's got reinforcements. But for the red side, what we predicted was effectively that like it's going to take a little while for Amorim to figure out what his squad looks like. Like United are the leakiest club in the whole of the Premier League. We see all sorts of nonsense coming out of there all the time. But he's got to basically rationally figure out, who's competent here, who am I keeping, who am I definitely getting rid of. They sort of leaked that they wanted to get rid of Rashford in the summer. It's because he has a huge pay package, at least, not least, and they're all about cutting every single bit of wages that they can. Most of the people they cut don't have long-term contracts. But I think the thing that we're seeing and that I expected was that they would be very boring until he got the defense stabilized. And then from that point, they'll use it as a basis to build the rest of their performance. The baseline for their defensive output is getting better. And so we're seeing that ratchet down to numbers that look like pretty reasonable. If they're only giving up sort of 0.6 to 1 expected goal a game, that's really good. Obviously, the first goal came off of what felt like a really lucky header from Huijsen. It could have been better defending from United. And then they had 23 shots in the game, couldn't necessarily put anything away, and Bournemouth took their chances quite well. But we've been saying this for 6 months since the podcast started. Like Manchester United are in a multi-year rebuilding. They don't have an awesome squad. They have some competent parts that I think might be better than we expect. And Amorim is going to take a bit to like solidify, and then you'll see them have some success. And maybe there were inklings of what they could potentially do against Everton, where they did have moments where they high pressed, not all the time, but moments where they high pressed, blew things up, had great success there. This is an epidemic this year of these goals happening in the Premier League, partly because teams are intermittently pressing and creating more of that, partly because they got so used to being able to play out of the back that there was another goal given up against, it was Ipswich that gave up basically a freebie this weekend, just passed it directly into a guy coming from the goalkeeper, immediately under pressure, comes right back at him. Like, you got to coach this out of these dudes. Like I know you wanted to coach possession football, and it's better to hold possession for a while, but not when everybody's under pressure all the time in your own half. Like that's not the right way to build that. So I think United will start to see more of that and have success. There are good trends on the defensive side, even if you lost at home 3-0 to Bournemouth at the weekend.
Yeah, it does look worse than it is, which I think is okay. It's better than like the Solskjaer thing where it looked much better than it was. But over these 6 games that he's been in charge, only Arsenal have allowed kind of fewer passes completed in their penalty area than United. Arsenal are top there by a long way, actually. But to me, if I were a United fan, there'd be something about this which is almost reassuring, which is if Amorim had come in, won a bunch of games, and suddenly United were thinking, oh, maybe we can get 6th or something. The club might be convinced that this is not a root and branch rebuild in the way that it needs to be. So having some shitty results at the beginning where there's no chance they're just going to immediately sack Amorim, I think is probably a good thing. It lets everybody know you are going to need to go through the crucible and come out the other side here.
And one of the things that we flag up, and the stats are really good at doing, is when there is rot, that means that the house is going to crumble, and that is like way overperforming your current metrics. Like Newcastle did it early in the season, right? And I was like, that's not sustainable. Like people like, oh, we're up in 3rd, we're back in competition for the Champions League, and you're like, there's nothing about their performances right now that suggests that they are the 3rd best team or anywhere near it. And obviously they came back down, and they have had some inconsistencies. They needed some health. Now they look like they're pretty good. Not the 3rd best team, and not even close to the 3rd best team. And so we flag up rot, but then we also flag up when somebody's building foundations, and those foundations will then be a cornerstone for future success. Defensive foundations for United are the most important thing. They gave up the second most shots in all of Europe last season. Like, let's not forget that. And so there's a long way to go to get to the point that, oh yeah, our defense is actually competent. And now when we bring in better attackers, like we can see them have a base to be able to perform from, as opposed to like being on a house of sand and waiting for the whole thing to erode and come crumbling back down.
Yeah. I mean, look, there we are. We're gonna leave it on a positive note for Manchester United, kind of. Is it, who says that we never give you guys anything? But thank you for everything you've given us this year. We're now at about 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're over 10,000 for the newsletter, which is bananas. We really do appreciate your support, and views on this have been ticking up nice and steady. So we're excited to see what we can bring you over the back half of the campaign. Obviously, we're still in this new Champions League format. The Premier League season is crazy, so it's a really good year for this venture to have started, to be honest.
I have a request for our people that are following us YouTube, or if you want to write us in the newsletter. But if you have a favorite FPL podcast that's a little bit under the radar, so like not ones that are enormous that have like hundreds of thousands of followers, but somebody that's a little bit under the radar, get in touch, because one of the things that I'm looking to do is add an FPL wing to kind of the transfer flow and variance next year. So not at the beginning of the year, we'll probably wait until the summertime, but it's going to take me a while to get through the different potentials. And if you are one of the people who have a podcast and you think that it kind of fits the style that we do around here, let me know and we'll investigate. These will be paid positions, so like we will bring people on board and make them part of the rotation. But that's something that I wanted to mention, that in addition to the gambling side of it, which sort of I oversee, and then Kim and I on the transfer side, and we also have people that contribute to the newsletter. We will be bringing on in the 25, 26 season. How old are we? We'll be hopefully bringing on a fantasy league to help this same sort of analysis that we do and give you guys insight and maybe help you get a little bit better results there in your leagues.
Super exciting. So that's an opportunity for anybody who's interested. Do make sure that you get in touch. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel as well. Make sure that you sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already, though I imagine you have. Follow us on social media. Drop any questions that you want in the comments below, because we'll look at them when we come back in early January. But otherwise, between now and then, we just want to say happy holidays and thanks for all your support this year. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.